Alaikum rahmatullah. Hello, Hassanal and um, listeners of Just International.
Salam
Um,
Prashad.
Good afternoon here in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia.
Thank you for joining us today, Prashad, and to the audience members also, welcome to another episode of the Just in Discussion series. And today, as mentioned, we are joined by Professor Shad Salim Faruqi, who's also a member of our Just Executive Committee. And today, we'll be talking about on a very broad topic, on a very large topic that's been spanning through time immemorial since the birth of the American nation itself. And we will be talking about American militarism in the 21st century, something that we at Just are constantly reviewing and overviewing because we can't discuss about the topic of hegemony without talking about American militarism in the 21st century itself. These two things are kind of interrelated about it. So, on that note, Prof. Shad, I want to ask you to share your thoughts on what you think about American militarism, especially how you view it in the 21st century itself.
First of all, thank you very much. I wish to begin by conveying a message of Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to all your listeners. I pray that the blessings of the season will bring forth peace on earth and goodwill towards all humanity. Now, as to the question of American militarism, um, some people say it became more prominent after 9/11. I don't think so. I think 9/11 was not a turning point. Surely 9/11 was not the beginning of America's preparedness and willingness to plunge into wars and mass killings that all wars entail. America's love or obsession with violence goes back in history, sadly. We have to remember, and this is not my view, this is the view actually of American scholars itself, that America was born in violence and in the genocide of its native Indian population. A small nation of 13 original states tucked in the east coast of the USA was expanding westwards and southwards by subjugating or exterminating the native population. And we have to also remember that the American Constitution gives to its people a constitutional right to bear arms. Now that indicates a little bit of the thinking of what is the good life and what is it that makes life flourish. What are the necessities of life? Now we all know that even before 9/11, the United States maintained a huge military industrial complex to support its adventures abroad. The US maintains 1,700 military bases around the world, 725 of which are outside the USA. It manufactures and sells arms worth trillions of dollars. It is the world's largest exporter of arms, including weapons of mass destruction, poisonous gases, etc., some of which are actually banned by international law. Often it sells arms to both sides of a conflict. For example, Iraq and Iran had a 7 or 8 year conflict, and they were receiving arms, ultimately American arms. Its military budget is humongous. In 2009, its budget was 732 billion. Now, this is more than the combined military budget of the next 10 countries, which are China, India, Russia, Saudi, France, Germany, the UK, Japan, South Korea, and Brazil. Now, in fact, Hassanal, the 732 billion may be inaccurate figure, not an accurate figure, because the CIA has large sums of money for foreign policy linked activities abroad to subvert governments that the US regards as unfriendly. And I don't think this 732 billion includes the CIA budget. Now, even before 9/11, America's Jekyll and Hyde character manifested itself in hegemonic and brutal policies abroad. It used atomic weapons on the innocent population of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, even though there's a great deal of opinion the Japanese army was on the verge of collapse and on the verge of surrendering.
Yeah.
Between 1945, that is end of World War II, and 2020, America has unleashed bombs and missiles on 28 countries in the third world and 4 countries in Europe. Now, the invasion and annihilation of Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, pulverization of Afghanistan, Iraq, the genocides in Palestine, with the help of American money and weapons, are all pre-9/11. The agony of countries like Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Palestine, Libya, and Yemen is mostly due to the brutal American military occupation or intervention in these lands. Now, the pernicious role of the USA and the West in obstructing the growth of representative institutions in many Muslim and, for that matter, Latin American societies cannot be denied. Time and again, the US and its Western allies have cooperated with the armed forces of subservient client states to thwart democratic elections in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Countries which were trying to make a painful transition from dictatorship to democracy. I think Algeria, Turkey, Palestine, Egypt are clear examples. Pro-Western, corrupt and inefficient Fatah and gave the mandate to Hamas. Israel, Europe, and America isolated and starved the democratically elected government of Hamas. Saddam of Iraq, Assad of Syria, Gaddafi of Libya refused to kowtow to America's desires. I think their greatest sin was that they were trying to peg foreign trade and oil to a currency other than the United States dollar. And their countries were converted into a veritable hell. Iran is suffering trade boycotts, United Nations referrals, and warnings of nuclear strikes. And actually, there's a great deal of opinion, including UN opinion, that Iran has not violated international law in terms of having nuclear weapons. Now, the US apartheid and sadly, a nation born on the ideals of liberty and justice has evolved into a brutal hegemon. In this Hobbesian state of President Truman have appointed themselves as the Leviathan, or a being with absolute power. Now, of course, no doubt that 9/11 has given a moral justification, so-called moral justification to the warring traits of American culture. But what needs to be said is this, that instead of trying to behind 9/11 and why, use terrifying means to usher in the new con's vision of a new American century. Now, this new American century doctrine and its documents are actually well known well before 9/11. There was this plan to usher in a new American century in the Middle East. 9/11 to me provides a rationalization of the pre-9/11
Sorry, Prashad, to interrupt a bit. I think there's something off with the connection. I'll just pause the video recording for a bit. We'll be right back.
I was a student in the USA at that time. In the Gulf of Tonkin incident, we were told that the Vietnamese had bombed an American ship, causing the death of
Mm.
a number of American soldiers. A few decades down the road, I discovered that actually it was not the Vietnamese who bombed
Mm.
the American ship. It was actually the Americans themselves who
Mhm.
staged an attack on their ship in order to justify a congressional resolution in favor of
Mhm.
military retaliation against Vietnam.
Yeah, a
So,
lot of stuff.
I, yes, indeed. I'm afraid that 9/11 has been given the credit or the blame for
Mhm.
America's militarism, but actually that's not true. Um, the, the the history of American military adventures uh,
Mm.
goes goes far back in history. But of
Mm.
course, 9/11 served as the springboard to profit the uh, military industry, of course, and that cannot be denied. The military budget after 9/11 continued to grow, and despite the end of the Cold War and the rise of a unipolar world, America's military of war budget
Mhm.
continues to grow, and it equals and surpasses the budget of the next top 10 countries, as I pointed out earlier.
Mm. Yes, that's true. On that note, actually, I mean, what you mentioned actually was actually quite enlightening and true, because at the end of the day, when we talk about the militarism aspect of the American empire, the militarism aspect of the American government and the American way, the way they actually espouse themselves politically speaking, the central core of it is that it's actually, one could say, in the culture of American society itself, because like you mentioned, you see, we all see through media and all these things, that how Americans tend to glorify their military, tend to put them on a
Yes, yes,
higher
indeed.
pedestal. And that's why when we
Yes.
actually talk about how they praise their military, advance their military campaign, it is so deeply rooted in American society in itself that one could say that it's hard to remove militarism from the American identity itself. Now,
Yes.
what I mention is because it comes to the next set of questions is why America needs to constantly pursue this increased act of militarism. And I think to keeps on pumping money, like you said, billions and billions, and that's just a very conservative amount. That's never mind the CIA efforts and all these things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So the next question is that because I've spoken to a few friends before, and they did say that why Americans need to be on top of the military game because they're the top dog. That's what they call themselves. They are the
Top
top
dog.
dog, and everyone naturally likes to go after the top dog, bring it down, and put it in its place. Do you agree with that notion, or is America more of a mad dog instead?
Well, I won't use the word mad dog, but certainly I agree with you that militarism is part of America's history, part of America's psyche, part of its, sadly, part of its self-worth.
Mm-hmm.
The military hero is greatly admired. They have elected military generals as their presidents. And
Mm-hmm.
when someone contests for Congress or for the presidency, his military record or lack of it is always an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Um, now, some people say that this militarism is partly the result of the influence of the deep state.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to say something about that. Indeed, the deep state is a very important factor. But I have jotted down about 11 other factors which I believe
Mm-hmm.
are um, instrumental in promoting, sustaining, and glorifying this culture of
Mm-hmm.
militarism in America. First of all, I have to say this with sadness. And I want to say this to you, Hassan, that I was actually a political science graduate from Wesleyan University, Middletown, Connecticut. I was
Mm-hmm.
lectured to by Professor Fred Greenstein and Nelson Polsby, who at one time actually were leading scholars.
Mm-hmm.
I believe, sadly, that the US is no more a functioning representative democracy. It has regressed into an oligarchy. It has been captured by an unholy alliance of the military, industrial media complex. At what point in time this metamorphosis, Franz Kafka type of metamorphosis took place? I don't know, but it has regressed. Power has shifted from the people to the Pentagon, from the Congress to the president. Career soldiers, oil barons, arms barons have displaced democratically elected leaders. There is also the power of the Jewish lobby to bribe and to finance US congressmen to pursue blatant pro-Israeli policies. I want to quote this to you from an American writer who said, the American Congress is and has been since the late 60s part of Israeli territory. This is an American scholar saying American Congress is actually part of Israeli territory, implying that the Congress is basically subordinated itself to the Israeli lobbies. Second, Hassanal, the issue also is of economic and technological point of view. Sad to say, wars create good business. They sell arms. They keep the war industry humming. They rake in billions of dollars, if not trillions, in new orders. They enable disposal of unused weapons. What to do with all these unused weapons? Oh, you have to sell them, and you have to get them to be used so that you can manufacture new ones. I mean, they can't be storing thousands and thousands of rockets in their factories. They have to sell them. Then from the science and technological point of view, sadly, wars usher in new discoveries, new and newer methods of killing and annihilating your enemies. Wars allow the testing of new weapons on the lives of colored people in Asia and Africa. They have to test a weapon. They can't do it on their own people. And they don't want to do it on their own territory. So the convenient thing is this: declare war or sell your weapon to someone and ask him to drop it on some nation of Asia and Africa, so that you can see how effective the weapon is. So this military-industrial complex needs to create wars, not just because of its sense of self-worth, but also because actually there's a compelling economic interest in waging wars. In much the same way McDonald's sells burgers, the military-industrial complex has to sell its weapons. A fourth factor that I have in mind is that the US Department of Defense commands large private armies of mercenaries to conduct secret black operations that are ethically and legally unjustifiable. It has privatized. Would you believe that? We all know, we should know, Defense Department has privatized incarceration and torture, which obviously have now acquired a lucrative business dimension. I remember the business dimension of the Iraq War. President Bush's advisors, who were advising him to bomb Iraq back to the Stone Age, were at the same time involved in factories or companies that were rebuilding the bridges and the water facilities that America had bombed earlier. So both ways, actually, they make money. A fifth factor is the psychological dimension that you had very ably mentioned earlier. In America, fighting a war is the ultimate act of nationalism. Military officers are regarded as heroes. They are good candidates for the presidency. In some respects, the US is addicted to permanent wars that it wages against enemies that it creates, it trains, it funds, and then it annihilates. I'm thinking of the Taliban in Afghanistan. Taliban was a creature of the United States government. And then of course, they used the Taliban to humiliate the Russians and Now they are waging a war against the Taliban. America's so-called war against terrorism, the killing of civilians in drone strikes, the destruction of thousands of homes, and the horrifying and gruesome spectacle of missile attacks shows that killing the weak and the helpless is very much part of the American psyche.
Yeah.
You know, the first rule of American combat is the enemy must be helpless.
True.
That's why they didn't attack North Korea, because
Mhm.
North Korea may hit back.
Yep, that's right.
They haven't attacked Iran yet because Iran knows how to fight.
Yeah.
Iran fought with Iraq, which was supplied arms by Israel, supplied assistance by US, yet Iran fought. So America basically loves to attack the helpless and the weak. I remember as a child being brought up on American films about how the West was won, how the cowboys were the good boys and the American Indians were the bad guys. Only later on I realized in my life, that what was glorified in these films was actually a shameful genocidal part of American history. I also want to state to you what US President Teddy Roosevelt once remarked. He said, and I quote, "A just war is in the long run far better for a man's soul than the most prosperous peace." That's an American president. Now, I hope that not many Americans still believe in this kind of nonsense. A further factor is, Hassan Al, there is massive in the military establishment of the USA. I'm told that in the last 2 decades, 6.5 trillion worth of allocations are not accounted for. Yet no auditor or congressman dare make much noise lest the accusation go out that you are anti-military and therefore anti-national. Now, this American scholar, Stephen Walt, he's a foreign policy scholar. He gives a number of other reasons why militarism is so much part of American culture. He says one reason is that America keeps on going to war is because it can. The US has a remarkably powerful military, and the temptation is there to use it to solve problems because America is so strong. A further factor is that America has no serious enemies. Though they're always talking about Iran and about Islamic terrorism, actually the America has no serious enemies. A further enabling factor behind US addiction to adventurism is the all-volunteer force. By limiting military service only to those individuals who volunteer to do it, who find glory in military service, who find it attractive, public opposition to wars of choice is more easily contained. So because it is a voluntary service, therefore, I can support the war because my children are not affected. And I think that's a very serious problem, that foreign policy thinking, especially the making of war in Washington, is dominated either by neoconservatives who openly proclaim the need to export liberty, democracy, and to them, there is never a war that they didn't like. Or it is supported by liberal interventionists who are just as enthusiastic about using military power to solve problems. And their worldviews, these worldviews are developed, promulgated, defended by a network of hundreds of think tanks, committees, public policy schools, and government agencies with million-dollar budgets. And these organizations consist of wealthy, privileged, highly educated group of people who are personally insulated from the consequences of the policies they advocate. Their sons are not going to be sent to Iraq most of the time. So they therefore espouse such policies. Now, a final factor is uh, authority to declare war is given to the Congress under the
mm,
American Constitution, not to the president.
mm,
But that authority has been steadily usurped ever
mm,
since World War II by the president, by
mm,
his warmongering advisors, and his generals.
mm,
So basically, that's what has happened actually. A,
mm,
a coterie of factors,
mm,
um, 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 economic, psychological, historical, um, and of course, strategic factors have combined together to create a culture that not
mm,
only glorifies, but in some respects is dependent
mm.
on violence
Yeah,
to promote policy programs.
yeah. So yeah, in that to summarize, Prashant, I think because we're also going to hit the time limit mark soon, but I want to capture the essence of what you said because at the end of the day, it is about not just the culture in itself, but also they've made it dependent, but also the dependency has also stemmed from the fact that one could say American society, American democracy itself, like you mentioned just now, has pretty much been slowly taken over by those in the
Yes,
elite and in
yes.
the powerful as well. And the power based on who to declare war, who's going to profit from it, is no longer in the hands of the people. It is no longer the decision of people whether they want to go to war or not, but by those within the elite stratas of society, of leadership itself in America. So on that note, I wanted to end on this question because it seems to have been progressing continuously onwards throughout time immemorial, starting from World War II, going to the Vietnam War, to 9/11 as a springboard after that. And we've seen what happens in recently in the Trump era of the presidency as well, about how he has approached it to basically the military and their endeavors overseas. So I want to ask you, what message do you have for the present leadership of America itself? What will you tell them moving forward into the future?
Yeah, actually, if I had my possibility, which I don't, I would go down on my knees and actually ask the American leaders, especially President-elect Biden,
Mhm.
that military might is not the only way to maintain security and your interest. America has a broken social order.
Mhm.
There is moral decadence. There is collapsing family life. There is poverty. There is extreme economic disparities. There are extreme economic disparities. There are racial hostilities, an inadequate health system, high crime rate by gun-toting populations. Um, I would say this to Mr. President. Mr. President, these social ills do not require nuclear weapons, missiles, and newer weapons of mass destruction, but more investment in nation building. I would also say this to Mr. President, that for large part of its history, rightly or wrongly, America was regarded by many of us, including me, as a sentinel of democracy and human rights. The United States, I thought as a teenager, as a student, was one of the architects of the UN Charter.
Mhm.
On many issues, it played a constructive role in world affairs. It undertook actions that earned the respect of the democratic world. Uh, I was fascinated as a teenager how America used to send its young people
Mhm.
as Peace Corps volunteers to Asia and Africa. I thought
Mhm.
this was such a beautiful thing. America favored decolonization.
Mhm.
It condemned the Anglo-French Israeli invasion of Suez.
Mhm.
President Eisenhower took a stand against this. It gave Marshall aid to Europe, shattered by the ravages of World War II. So there is much actually uh, uh, good in American hearts and souls that
Mhm.
need to be revived. But today, even those who admire the United States are worried about America's unilateralism and about how America is at odds with the world and with its own ideals.
Mhm.
Um, I want to say this to uh, Mr. President, that what America needs is leadership that
Mhm.
revives the ideals of the American Declaration of Independence 244 years ago. America today has metamorphosed into a Jekyll and Hyde nation. It needs to look within, return to the faith of its forefathers. I wish it well. I pray that President Biden will remember the famous words of the Reverend Jesse Jackson's admonition that leaders of substance do not follow opinion polls. They mold opinion, not with guns or dollars or position, but with the power of their souls.
Mm.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prashad. Very, very deep and wise words that I think that we all can reflect on as well, not just to any Americans out there that who are looking to the future, especially moving out from 2020 and looking forward to what may come. But on that note, I think at the end of the day, there is much to unpack, and we'll be continuously also revisiting this topic, I think, because this topic of militarism is something that it does not just deal with an event or so, but something that deals with at the heart of it, the heart and soul of humanity in different civilizational contexts as well. So thank you very much, Prashad, for joining me today.
Thank you, Asana.
And probably we'll see each other next time as well.
Thank you very much, yes. And thank you to all the listeners. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.